How far should a nation go to maintain its dignity? When respect is denied, does sovereignty demand a response? These are the questions that would echo across West Africa following an unprecedented diplomatic crisis that began with a simple act of disregard. The midday sun beat down mercilessly on Ouagadougou's Avenue de la Liberté, where dust particles danced in the heat waves rising from the pavement. The city hummed with the familiar symphony of motorbike engines, street vendors' calls, and the occasional blast of hip-hop music from passing vehicles. At exactly 11:43 a.m., an inconspicuous black Toyota Land Cruiser, not the polished government vehicle one might expect, pulled up half a block from the Ghanaian embassy. The man who stepped out wore no insignia of power. His faded olive button-down hung loosely over simple khaki pants. His face, partly shadowed by a worn canvas hat, carried the determined expression of someone accustomed to making difficult decisions. This was Lieutenant Colonel Paul-Henri Sandaogo Damiba's successor, President Ibrahim Traoré, the 35-year-old military leader who would become Africa's youngest head of state after Burkina Faso's second coup of 2022. Captain Farouk Azaria, Traoré's closest security advisor, leaned forward from the driver's seat. "Are you certain about this approach, Mr. President?" he asked, his voice low with concern. "The Ghanaians have been making problematic statements about our military cooperation with Russia. This is precisely why protocol exists." Traoré adjusted his simple watch, a far cry from the gold-plated timepieces favored by many African leaders. "Protocol is for those who require the trappings of power to feel powerful," he replied, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had made him both feared and revered. "I need to speak with Ambassador Boniface Gambila directly about these accusations. No intermediaries, no diplomats filtering messages." 2 weeks earlier, Ghana's Foreign Minister Shirley Iorker Bachwe had made statements at the United Nations expressing grave concerns about Burkina Faso's growing military relationship with Russia, suggesting it was destabilizing the region. President Akufo-Addo had followed with thinly veiled criticisms about young military leaders being manipulated by external powers. The diplomatic tension had escalated when 3 Burkinabe citizens were detained in Accra under suspicious circumstances. Traoré checked his phone, noting the message from General Celestin Simpor confirming military exercises were proceeding as planned near the Mali border. The president slipped the device into his pocket and nodded once to Azaria. 90 minutes. That's all I need." Azaria knew better than to argue. The president had cultivated this habit of unannounced appearances since taking power, visiting military barracks at midnight, showing up at remote villages without warning, dropping into ministerial meetings unscheduled. It was how he maintained his reputation for omnipresence, how he kept everyone accountable. "I'll be watching," Azaria said simply. Traoré crossed the street, navigating between 2 taxis whose drivers were too engaged in animated conversation to notice the leader of their nation walking past. A fruit seller offering mangoes and papayas looked up briefly, her eyes widening with recognition before she quickly lowered her gaze, uncertain whether to acknowledge what she had seen. The Ghanaian embassy stood as a modern anomaly among the predominantly French colonial architecture of Ouagadougou, all glass and steel, constructed during the economic boom period under former Ghanaian President John Dramani Mahama. Its entrance featured a small security checkpoint where 2 Ghanaian guards in crisp uniforms managed visitor access as Traoré approached. Neither guard stood at attention. Why would they? The president of Burkina Faso would surely arrive with a motorcade, with advance notice, with the full ceremonial entourage befitting his position. The taller guard, his name tag read Ajay, looked up from his phone with mild irritation at being disturbed. His colleague, shorter and stockier, shifted in his chair, sliding a clipboard forward with the visitor log. Name and purpose. Ajay stated flatly in English, barely making eye contact. Ibrahim Traoré. The president replied in the same language. "I'm here to speak with Ambassador Gambila regarding a matter of national security." The guard's eyes flicked briefly to Traoré's simple attire, then back to his face with visible skepticism. "Do you have an appointment?" he asked, his tone making clear the answer he expected.
"No," Traoré replied calmly.
"But the ambassador will want to see me." The second guard snorted softly. "Everyone thinks their business is urgent. The ambassador is preparing for tomorrow's trade delegation." No unscheduled visitors. A woman in a tailored business suit exited the embassy, pausing briefly when she saw Traoré. Her expression shifted from casual disinterest to confusion to shock as recognition dawned. Mercy Tego, the embassy's deputy chief of mission, had met the president at a regional security conference 3 months earlier. She opened her mouth to speak, but Traoré gave an almost imperceptible shake of his head. Intrigued, she hesitated, then continued past, pulling out her phone as she walked briskly toward the embassy parking lot. "Perhaps you can arrange an appointment for next week," Ajay suggested, already reaching for a business card. "The proper channels." "I understand," Traoré interrupted quietly. "Thank you for your time." Without protest or explanation, he turned and began walking away, the same measured pace, the same unassuming demeanor. Behind him, the guards exchanged glances, shrugged, and returned to their previous activities, unaware of the diplomatic earthquake they had just triggered. Across the street, a university student named Issa Compare had been filming the entire interaction on his phone, his hand trembling slightly as he realized the significance of what he'd captured. With shaking fingers, he uploaded the video to TikTok with the caption, "They just denied entry to our president at the Ghanaian embassy. #respect, #Traoré, #Burkina dignity." As Traoré walked back toward his vehicle, he pulled out his phone and made a call, not to his security detail or foreign ministry, but to someone unexpected. "Fatoumata," he said quietly to his 19-year-old niece who managed his social media presence. "There will be a video circulating soon. Let it spread naturally." No official comment. His second call went to General Qasim Coulibaly, commander of the National Operations Command Center. "Implement Protocol 17, he said simply. "Effective immediately." At the embassy, Deputy Chief Mercy Tego rushed into Ambassador Gambila's office without knocking, interrupting his meeting with a trade representative from Kumasi. "Mr. Ambassador," she said urgently, "President Traoré was just at our gate. In person." The guards turned him away. Gambila's coffee cup froze halfway to his lips. "What did you just say?" he asked, his voice deadly quiet. He came alone, dressed like an ordinary citizen. No security, no advance team. "Our guards didn't recognize him and denied him entry when he requested to see you." The ambassador set down his cup with deliberate care, dismissing the trade representative with a quick gesture. "How long ago?" "Less than 5 minutes." Gambila reached for his phone, but before he could dial, it began ringing, the Ghanaian foreign minister's direct line. "Boniface," came the tense voice of Shirley Iorker Botchway. "There's a video going viral showing your security turning away President Traoré. What in God's name is happening there?" "Madam Minister, I've just been informed. The video has 50,000 shares already. President Akufo-Addo has been notified. This is a diplomatic disaster." As the foreign minister continued, Gambila's attention was drawn to his window, where he noticed 3 military vehicles pulling up across the street, not close enough to be provocative, but clearly visible. "I'll call you back," he interrupted, ending the call abruptly. Within 30 minutes, the scene outside the Ghanaian embassy had transformed. Military vehicles now occupied strategic positions on adjacent streets. Soldiers in Burkinabe uniforms stood at attention, their presence a silent statement of power. They made no aggressive moves, brandished no weapons, simply stood as living embodiments of state authority. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Minister Albert Badiono received identical envelopes delivered simultaneously to various diplomatic missions throughout Ouagadougou. Inside was a single page with an official government seal. In accordance with Article 7 of the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations and Sovereign Prerogative of the Republic of Burkina Faso, all Ghanaian diplomatic operations within national territory are hereby suspended for a period of 72 hours pending review of bilateral relations. All embassy staff are to remain within diplomatic premises during this period. This measure takes effect immediately. The notice was signed not by a minister or diplomat, but by the president himself. His modest office in the presidential compound, far less ornate than those of his predecessors, Ibrahim Traoré sat reviewing agricultural production reports as if nothing unusual had transpired. His aide, Mariam Ouedraogo, entered with a tablet showing the rapidly unfolding social media response. "Sir, the video has reached 2 million views. It's trending across West Africa." Traoré nodded without looking up from his papers. "And the other matter?" he asked. "Exactly as you anticipated. The leaders of Mali and Niger have both called requesting urgent consultations. President Goïta sent a particular message saying, 'The lions are finally roaring in their own jungle.'" For the first time that day, Traoré allowed himself a small smile. "Schedule calls with both for this evening." And the Ghanaian reaction? Their foreign ministry has issued an emergency statement expressing profound regret for the unfortunate misunderstanding and requesting immediate diplomatic channels for resolution. Traoré turned a page in his agricultural report, studying irrigation figures for the northern provinces. "No response necessary," he said. "Let them feel the weight of silence." While diplomatic chaos unfolded in the capital, in the northern village of Teteo near the Mali border, 12-year-old Ajaratu Compare sat beside her grandmother, watching the family's only smartphone as the video replayed. The girl's father, a lieutenant in the Burkinabe army, had been killed 6 months earlier in a jihadist attack. "Grandma, why didn't the president get angry when they disrespected him?" she asked. The elderly woman adjusted her colorful head wrap and smiled. "Child, true power doesn't need to shout. The lion doesn't announce he is a lion. He simply is, and the forest knows." Across the village square, schoolteacher Pascal Sawadogo gathered his students under the shade of a massive baobab tree, their usual classroom when afternoon temperatures made their concrete building unbearable. "Today's history lesson has walked into our present," he told the children, holding up his phone showing President Traoré walking away from the Ghanaian embassy. "What does this image teach us about leadership?" A boy in the back raised his hand. "That our president is just like us. He doesn't need fancy clothes." "Yes," Sawadogo nodded. "But more importantly, it shows that respect isn't requested, it's commanded." At the Ghanaian embassy, panic had given way to crisis management. Ambassador Gambila paced his office while on a video call with President Nana Akufo-Addo himself, along with Ghana's National Security Advisor Dr. Aboaji. "How could this happen?" the Ghanaian president demanded, his normally measured tone sharp with concern. "We are already navigating delicate issues with Russia's growing influence in the Sahel. This incident plays directly into their narrative about Western disrespect. Sir, our guards followed standard protocol for unannounced visitors," Gambila explained weakly. "President Traoré deliberately came without identification or security." "He is the identification," Akufo-Addo interrupted. "He's the president of the republic where you serve. This isn't about protocol. It's about recognition and respect." Dr. Aboaji leaned forward on the video call. "Mr. Ambassador, our intelligence suggests this may not have been entirely spontaneous. 3 days ago, President Traoré visited a village where a French company had been operating a controversial gold mine. He promised the elders that no foreigner would disrespect Burkina Faso's sovereignty again. This incident creates a perfect narrative for him." Ambassador Gambila moved to his window, watching as a crowd began gathering across the street. They weren't protesting, not yet, but their presence was a message, a show of silent solidarity with their leader. "It's worse than that," he admitted. "We've received word that Russia's ambassador to Burkina Faso, Alexei Saltykov, has requested an emergency meeting with Traoré this evening." The implications hung heavily in the virtual room. Russia had been strategically expanding its influence throughout the Sahel as countries like Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger distanced themselves from traditional Western allies. This incident provided perfect ammunition for the narrative that Western powers and their African allies didn't respect these nations' sovereignty. "Fix this," President Akufo-Addo said simply before ending the call. As evening fell over Ouagadougou, the story had transformed into something larger than a diplomatic incident. In markets and cafes, on street corners and in family compounds, the conversation was the same. A president who walked among his people without ceremony, who faced disrespect with dignity rather than forced it. The influential radio Omega FM popular host Moussa Diallo devoted his entire evening program to the incident, taking calls from excited citizens. "For decades, we've had leaders who lived like kings while we suffered," said one caller. "Now we have a leader who looks like us, walks like us, and stands for our dignity." Another caller added, "The French treated us this way for years. Now Ghana too? When did African brothers start disrespecting each other?" The city's energy shifted as darkness fell. Spontaneous gatherings formed in neighborhoods across Ouagadougou. Not protests, celebrations. Young men on motorcycles rode through streets waving Burkinabe flags. Women gathered in doorways singing traditional songs of pride and resilience. The atmosphere wasn't angry. It was electric with something that had been missing for too long. Collective dignity at his home that evening. President Traoré hosted an unexpected guest. Contrary to security protocols and despite the diplomatic crisis, he had invited Fatou Bintou, the fruit seller who had recognized him outside the Ghanaian embassy, to bring her family for dinner. They sat in his modest courtyard, not in the lavish presidential palace favored by his predecessors, but in his personal home where he'd insisted on living despite security concerns. "Why did you invite us, Mr. President?" Fatou asked as her children shyly ate rice and peanut stew at the same table as the nation's leader. Traoré smiled genuinely for the first time that day. "Because today you reminded me why I serve. When our eyes met, I saw neither fear nor worship, just recognition between citizens of the same nation." Fatou's eldest son, a university student, leaned forward. "But sir, the video, everyone is saying you planned it all, that you knew they wouldn't recognize you." Traoré took a sip of water before answering. "When I was your age, I read Thomas Sankara's speeches religiously. He said, 'You cannot carry out fundamental change without a certain amount of madness.' Perhaps what looks like strategy is sometimes just that necessary madness." His phone buzzed with a message. Russia's Ambassador Saltykov had arrived at the presidential offices for their meeting, a meeting Ghana's intelligence services were undoubtedly aware of and concerned about. Traoré excused himself, but before leaving, he placed a hand on the young man's shoulder. "Remember, sovereignty isn't just about flags and borders. It begins with how we carry ourselves, how we demand to be seen." At the presidential offices, Ambassador Alexei Saltykov waited with a knowing smile. The stocky Russian diplomat had been cultivating relationships throughout the Sahel as France's influence waned. "Mr. President," he began as Traoré entered, "a remarkable day for Burkina Faso's dignity. Russia understands what it means to stand against disrespect." Traoré took his seat, studying the Russian carefully. "I didn't come to discuss today's events, Ambassador. I came to discuss the military training agreement your government proposed last month." Saltykov's smile widened. "Of course, given today's demonstration of how your African neighbors treat you, perhaps our offer of advanced military equipment and training seems more appealing. Or perhaps," Traoré countered calmly, "it reveals that no nation, east or west, should assume they understand our path." The Russian's expression faltered slightly as Traoré continued. "Your equipment comes with expectations of political alignment. The Ghanaians' disrespect came with assumptions about our sovereignty. Neither recognizes that Burkina Faso charts its own course." Traoré slid a folder across the table, a modified version of the military cooperation agreement with significant changes. "We'll accept training for our special forces and anti-terrorism units, but no Russian military base on our soil. We'll purchase your equipment at market rates, not in exchange for mining concessions." The Russian's face remained impassive, but his fingers tightened almost imperceptibly around his pen. "That's not the arrangement we discussed." "No," Traoré agreed. "It's the arrangement worthy of equal partners." By the second day of the diplomatic suspension, international media had descended on Ouagadougou. CNN, Al Jazeera, BBC Africa, and France 24 broadcasted live from locations around the capital, their reports reaching audiences far beyond West Africa. The headquarters of the regional bloc ECOWAS in Abuja. An emergency session had been called. Nigeria's representative argued for mediation, while Côte d'Ivoire pushed for pressure on Burkina Faso to reverse its decision. Mali's representative stood to address the gathering. "Perhaps before we debate how to respond, we should ask why so many of our citizens celebrate this incident." Why does a simple act of a president walking away from disrespect resonate so deeply across our continent? On social media, the hashtags #RespectBurkinaFaso and #Chorewalks had spread across Africa and beyond. Artists created stylized images of the president's silhouette walking away from the embassy. Musicians from Dakar to Kinshasa released impromptu songs celebrating the president who walks like a citizen but stands like a nation. In Ghana, public opinion had turned sharply against their government's handling of the situation. Opposition parties called for the resignation of Foreign Minister Bachwe, while university students held demonstrations supporting Burkina Faso's right to respect. The Ghanaian parliament in Accra, Minority Leader Haruna Idrisu addressed his colleagues. When did we become the nation that treats African heads of state with contempt? Have we forgotten our own Kwame Nkrumah's vision of Pan-African dignity? On the morning of the third day, as the 72-hour diplomatic suspension neared its end, President Traoré visited Camp Guillaume Ouedraogo, the main military base in Ouagadougou, not for a formal inspection, but to sit with junior officers during their morning meal. "Sir," one lieutenant asked boldly, "there are rumors that Ghana threatened military exercises at our border in response to the embassy closure." Traoré continued eating his simple breakfast of rice and beans. "Let them exercise. We continue building." Another soldier leaned forward. "And the Russians, sir? Will we align with them now against our neighbors?" Traoré set down his spoon, looking each soldier in the eye before responding. "We align with our people, not with East, not with West." The dignity we showed at the embassy gate wasn't about choosing sides in someone else's game. It was about refusing to play that game at all. As he left the base, his phone rang with news he had been expecting. Ghanaian President Nana Akufo-Addo had requested a direct call. When the two leaders spoke, the conversation was brief but substantive. Akufo-Addo personally apologized for the incident, announced the immediate recall of Ambassador Gambila, and proposed a face-to-face meeting in the neutral location of Lomé, Togo, to reset relations. Traoré accepted both the apology and the meeting proposal with characteristic brevity. Then he added one more thing, the only request he would make. "When we meet, Mr. President, let us both come without large delegations. Leader to leader, African to African. The solutions to our continent's challenges won't be found in grand hotels with foreign advisors whispering in our ears." After a moment's pause, Akufo-Addo agreed. That afternoon, President Traoré signed the order lifting the diplomatic suspension. As expected, international media portrayed it as a de-escalation, a return to normalcy after a brief crisis. But in Burkina Faso, people understood something different had happened. At a small primary school in Ouagadougou's outskirts, teacher Florence Ouedraogo pinned a newspaper photo to the classroom wall, the now famous image of Traoré walking away from the Ghanaian embassy. Beneath it, she wrote a quote from Thomas Sankara, the revolutionary leader whose legacy Traoré had revived. "We must learn to live the African way. It's the only way to live in freedom and with dignity." Later that week, when Presidents Traoré and Akufo-Addo met in Lomé, they arrived as promised in modest vehicles with minimal security, no red carpets, no ceremonial bands. Just two African leaders sitting face to face. What was discussed remained between them, but witnesses noted both men seemed to speak as equals, the younger revolutionary and the elder statesman finding common ground not through concessions or threats, but through mutual respect that asked for Ibrahim Traoré. He returned to Ouagadougou and immediately resumed work on agricultural reform plans he had been reviewing the day of the incident. No victory speeches, no celebratory rallies. When an aide suggested releasing an official statement about the resolution with Ghana, Traoré shook his head. "Our farmers in Banfora don't need statements. They need irrigation systems that work. Our dignity was never in question. Our development is the urgent matter." The aide hesitated, then asked the question many had wondered. "Sir, did you know they wouldn't recognize you at the embassy that day?" Traoré looked up from his papers, his expression unreadable. "The question isn't whether I knew. The question is why they didn't." In that simple response lay the essence of what had transpired, a lesson in leadership that would be studied in villages and universities alike for years to come. Not a lesson about diplomatic protocols or international relations, but something more fundamental. In a world accustomed to power announcing itself with sirens and ceremonies, Sometimes the most profound statement is simply walking as a citizen of your own land, carrying nothing but the dignity of your nation in your steps. And in this way, Ibrahim Traoré had rewritten not just a diplomatic incident, but the very language of power in a post-colonial Africa still finding its voice.